Hello, hello, and welcome back to Beers with VCs. This is, as you know, the last Friday of the month. I'm here today with my good friend Chris Kim from Union Labs and Sabrina Passman, as always. Chris, an established deep tech investor from Union Labs, and which he co-founded with Nate, and he's also, like us, ex-operator, ex-startup employee who has come a long way and become a great investor. Man, this beer has hit me hard. I should have had a little bit more to eat at lunch.
Are you sure that wasn't like double-digit ABV?
I'm having today Steel Reserve, which is my go-to hobo beer, 24 ounces. And I should have taken it a little bit easier. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to get started with, as usual, a round of talking about our beers. So Chris, why don't you go first?
Sure. So today I'm drinking Orion beer. This is from Okinawa. It's a very light, crisp, and refreshing, and it was also on sale. So very good value.
Is it one of your go-tos, Chris?
On sale beer? Yes. On sale beer is definitely one of my go-tos.
Everyone needs a go-to on sale beer for sure.
Sabrina, what have you got?
Today I'm doing 21st Amendment, a classic hazy. Yeah, got it at Costco.
Nice, good old hazy IPA. Easy drinking for a Friday afternoon. Okay, So to start, I really do appreciate Chris having come from an operator background, as I mentioned earlier. Really would love to hear a little bit about your background, Chris, how you went from your bachelor's in physics to VP at one of the world's most renowned, I think, smart lock companies, August Home, to becoming a deep tech VC. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey and some of the highlights along the way?
Sure. We might need a little bit more than an hour to cover my hopscotching along the way. We were just chatting about this in the digital green room beforehand, and I was just like, oh yeah, I used to work in Jamaica. And Sabrina's like, wait, what? Where did that come from? But yeah. So I guess a little bit of background. I grew up in Pennsylvania on the East Coast, and my family were a bunch of physicists. So that's where my life was basically planned out. I was supposed to become a physicist and become a professor and all that kind of stuff. And as you can tell, that's exactly where I ended up.
Professor Kim.
I actually,
I refer to you.
Not really. But I mean, after coming out of college, I much to my parents' disappointment, I decided to take a little break before I went to graduate school. That break turned into maybe a couple of decades. But sorry, Mom, sorry, Dad. I ended up going into consulting. I used to work for Monitor Group in Boston, London, and Istanbul for a number of years before coming out to the Bay Area. And this was during the first .com, and I actually joined another venture incubator back then. That was my first exposure to startups and venture. Our group had sold a company called MySimon to CNET for about $800 million, which is just an astronomical sum even back then. And everyone thought they're geniuses. We can start companies. We can invest in companies. We know all about investing, and we all know how that turned out. And so I decided to embark on a series of professional education via working in different companies, starting other companies before landing up where I am now at Union Labs, back in venture, now with a much stronger background in education from an operator standpoint, and being able to invest a little bit more thoughtfully than I was in, say, 1999.
That's incredible. Every time we talk, I hear new nuggets of fascinating career advice and just very, very diverse background, Chris. So it's really cool. What would you say was the earliest point in your career that you thought you would end up as a VC?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first exposure, during the .com era, back then there weren't a whole lot of blogs, on, hey, this is what being a VC is like. VC Twitter did not even exist or anything like that, and so naturally, I went to the one place where you could find out about VC, which was Amazon, and promptly bought these ancient texts on how to be a VC, which were all appeared to have been written in the late 1970s. So that was a totally thorough education in it. But I did like the idea of creating businesses and building value. Remember, these are much older school thinking that were actually committed to paper in the form of nearly textbooks at that time. So they do make it sound very, very constructive. How are you really building long-term value? And that actually really captured me. I think that was one of the fun aspects to me, as well as meeting all the different entrepreneurs at the time. At the same time, you have to understand, obviously, the .com, you saw all sorts of crazy ideas, and they seemed to bear no relationship to any form of
With
business
long-term
reality
value.
at the time, with long-term value. And so that was a little bit difficult for me to square at the time. All this book knowledge with what I was actually seeing in the field. But I would say that definitely piqued my interest. And then, of course, after the .com crash, I was like, well, it was pretty clear that was not creating long-term value, but I'm still interested in it. So let's see how this plays out.
Very
That's
cool.
super interesting. I wonder, given you have such a large view of how VC has progressed over the decades, how do you view this current cycle? We're going a little off script here, but how do you view this current cycle of the next decade compared to everyone in the past?
Yeah, that's a pretty broad spectrum, but I'll just focus on what I am more aware of. So, I look at things punctuated by the downturns, right? The one that we're currently going through or experiencing within venture now, the last one, the GFC in 2008-ish timeframe, and of course the .com crash. If I can use a shorthand, I feel like so much of investing during the very bubbly times is driven by momentum, or it's sort of a game of musical chairs. Like, you have a really interesting opportunity, and you manage to generate enough interest in it, and somebody else comes on and follows on. That kind of investing, you can, and people have made a tremendous amount of money. And that is what actually attracts, it's sort of a flywheel. You see a bunch of people making money, either founders or VCs, and it attracts more people into the ecosystem, which perpetuates it. For me, I find that a more challenging investment environment because it is very timing based, and the pillars of what is value are less immediately obvious. I think that the era that we're entering into now obviously reflects a reversion to the mean. Let's see what kind of value can you actually create. People are asking much harder questions of companies around, what's your actual revenue traction? How durable is that? What's the actual business value you're delivering to your customers? And how do we know that you're going to really scale this very quickly? And to me, that really harkens back to some of those old books that I read. And you could even argue that, any sort of value-based investor would have a much better understanding of this now as well. So that's kind of the era that I feel like we are about to enter into. People are starting to ask some of the opening questions around that. I think the other characteristic is character. And that may seem like a funny thing to mention, but when times are flush, everyone's your friend. When there's cash that's easily available and it's easy to raise money, relatively speaking, then people are very friendly. I saw during the .com crash, or as the market was beginning to turn, you saw people's true colors come out, and I think that's really important to understand. the character of the partners that you work with, the founders that you invest in, the teams who are doing the actual building. All of those things are really going to come out when resources become tighter and tighter. But at the end of the day, that's a much more interesting problem to me, because this business is ultimately based on relationship building and really understanding who you're talking to. So I think between really trying to create some interesting business value and really trying to get to know the people that you're working with, that is much more tractable and interesting to me. So I think the time that we're entering into is going to be a lot of fun from an investing standpoint.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
you bring up some good points about character and value, and that, I guess, is a good segue to my next question, which is around your background as an operator and entrepreneur. How do you feel that brings character or uniqueness to you as an investor and value to your portfolio companies and founders? I've heard a lot of kind of discussion on this topic. It's somewhat cliche, but I do still believe that there is at least a more degree of empathy in general with ex-operator investors.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about being a founder or operator or what have you, I mean, is that it's just so stinking hard, and especially when you are building a deep tech company where there aren't a lot of templates for how the business should grow, how you're going to de-risk the science and technology. Yes, or anything. Where's your next round of financing going to come from, et cetera. And it's really, very, very, very challenging, and it's not for the faint of heart on the founder side. There were a lot of different experiences, while building the company that no one's ever going to appreciate. And you grind through it. You might have a small win out of it, or it might be a really tough experience that quote unquote builds character. But no one's going to give you credit for it at that time. But I think that the founders that we invest in can sense that we already have that shorthand of that terrible experience or difficult time, or those amazing highs of being able to close a particular sale or reach a product milestone. That if you haven't been through it, if you haven't done it, it's very difficult to understand how high those highs are, or how low those lows are, or how lonely and anonymous those difficult times are, without actually having that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the loneliness and the imposter syndrome and the tough times, and how and when to talk about them on previous sessions. I think the one with Furus was particularly insightful. But yeah, I guess without going off topic too much, do you have any tips on how and when to share those moments of learnings?
I mean, yeah, you're usually trying to find some form of pattern matching to the situation that the founder is actually in. I'll take one example. A lot of our founders are negotiating agreements with vendors and suppliers, and sometimes your counterpart might be really slow or seemingly overly thorough. I personally experienced that with a Japanese supplier that we used during our time at August, and they were quoting incredibly long lead times, very, very high unit costs, very high NRE. And we would have ditched them, and we searched the world for an alternative supplier, and none existed, or none was willing to take on the work. And so we suffered through it and complained about it, the entire time, as incredibly mature founders that we were. And several years later, we were having an update conversation with this supplier, and they casually mentioned in passing that they'd had a number of inbound inquiries for the specific component. It was a motor and gearbox drivetrain that we were using in the lock, and that they had declined all of them. People were asking for the designs, they were asking for the templates, they were asking, since they got denied on those, they were asking, hey, can we just buy this? I see this, you clearly make this SKU, we'll just pay you for it. And the supplier said, no, this design belongs to August, right? And the reason I think this story is significant is because we were building a consumer electronics product, and we assumed that it would be immediately counterfeited and copied and mass manufactured by other people in China. And I've never seen a counterfeit of our first version of the product. And the reason is because there is literally nobody else who could build that particular component the way we had designed it. And we had no patent, no trademark, no design rights to that specific component. It was purely on the strength of the relationship with the supplier and the respect that they had in the partnership and the relationship, despite no contract or language being in place around it. That's the only reason, actually, that it was never counterfeited, that there are no copies of it on the market. It didn't hit me until that conversation. Oh, yeah, we've never seen a counterfeit August product on the market because it's just too damn hard. And so, I'll share that, sometimes with some founders, just as an experience of like, look, invest in the relationship. You just never know sometimes. And the character really does, come through on some of these partners. I'm not saying that you have to do that for every single relationship, but here's a counterpoint, for what you might think is suffering at that particular time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cool. This is a really, really insightful story, and certainly fascinating to hear about creating defensibility through supply chain or sourcing, which I think is unique. People often assume the opposite, right? That I guess, like you were assuming too, that the product would be quickly counterfeited and that patents aren't necessarily that easy to enforce. Yeah, that's great insight. So I want to move on to, I guess, your more recent career and your deep tech investing, and maybe just to open up on that topic around deep tech and what is deep tech. There's a lot of different investors and founders that define deep tech differently. I think we all have our own kind of niche within deep tech. Like Omni is focused on manufacturing and industrials tech. Union is a little bit broader in their sense. But yeah, number one, what do you define as deep tech? And then also, what does Union invest in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll answer this in a couple of different ways. The way Union Labs looks at it is we look for ambitious founders who are technical with a big vision on how to solve some sort of problem, and who happen to be using deep or hard technologies in order to solve it. Another way that I look at this is this whole segmentation, categorization of all the different types of tech investing, fintech, e-commerce, deep tech, et cetera. That's more of a relatively recent phenomenon, because if you look at when the entire seed VC category, came into being, originally seed was something that was done by friends and family. There were no institutional VCs. And the first ones in this space, like Jeff Clavier of Uncorked, which was back then called Softtech, with Charles Hudson, Steph Palmieri, or Aileen Lee of Cowboy Ventures, Mike Maples of Floodgate, they didn't say that, oh, we only invest in fintech at the seed stage, or pre-seed stage. They're just saying we are seed VCs and we invest broadly across tech. And the only common denominator around these is that, yes, they're looking at early tech companies that are actually going to build an interesting business that's going to scale really fast. And so when I talk about deep tech now, like, I view deep tech as a characteristic of the companies that we are investing in. It's a tool, but it's not solely a way to categorize, what we invest in or how we look at the world, because the world is full of people who like doing science and building science projects. And I think that's very good to create science and push the frontier of science forward. But that may or may not be a venture scaled business. And I think that's an important distinction to make. So that's why we use the framing of, hey, what's the big problem that you're solving? And are you doing something technically interesting around that in order to solve it?
Very cool. Sabrina, go ahead.
It's super interesting to hear you frame it from the sense of like what tech investing meant 10, 15 years ago versus now everyone's trying to differentiate and get deeper and more narrow, at least from the VC perspective. But in reality, I think we all are kind of looking for the same underlying scalability factors of the different businesses in various fields. And I think that particularly for what today is known as deep tech, it's often a very it's slower timelines compared to the historic tech investable businesses. And I'm very interested to hear how Union handles that, and if that is something that is a barrier to investment, or is that maybe how to work around that, basically.
Yeah. If I can rephrase your question, you're basically asking around like, hey, venture has recently invested largely in software, which scales really, really fast. It doesn't require a whole lot of capital. Whereas deep tech, you could be investing in a robot that requires 5 years to develop. How are you going to get to market? That is part of the filter that we're looking at. Venture is governed by that 10-year cycle. And the need to invest and see some form of return within that time frame. So that is part of our filtration of the companies that we are looking at. We do look for near-term commercialization opportunities, and we also look for a line or a path to that bigger vision, that $1 billion plus TAM opportunity outcome as well. But that near-term commercial application step is pretty important and critical to us, because we want to make sure that there is some constant touch with the market and customers that, in addition to the revenue, continues to inform the development of the company and the business. Because without that discipline, you could get into that situation where you are, just doing nothing but R&D for like 6 years, and that's very tough.
Yeah. Chris, you mentioned the segmentation of the VC industry, and I've also noticed this and had conversations around, especially in the emerging manager community, more and more niche funds. Do you think that's a factor of actually these funds needing to do deeper technical diligence earlier, or other market factors like the barriers to entry being lower for emerging VCs?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty complex question. I can offer just one sort of perspective on it, which is that emerging VCs represent a market, right? If you look at it from the LP standpoint, they're looking for opportunities to invest in interesting emerging managers who are eventually going to scale and break out as well, or define a particular category and do really well. There are, a not insignificant number of emerging managers out there. So what you're trying to do from an LP perspective is identify the ones that you either vibe with or, attack an interesting problem area or differentiate it in some way, shape, or form. And so the result of that, in many ways, the response is for emerging managers to attempt to differentiate themselves from, their peers in the crowd, depending on what they're doing. That's one aspect of it. I do think, to your point around like, hey, I can be specialized in this particular area. I happen to understand a lot about I don't know, defense contracting with the government, right? So any particular company that's building defense tech, for example, can benefit from my inside expertise, and that's going to be an interesting path forward as well. I'm just going to lean into that. Or I founded and sold a couple of robotics companies. Like, I know all about robots. Then yes, that totally makes sense for them to focus in on that area, because that's where they're going to get their edge.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's definitely a two-way aspect to it. The emerging manager is looking for differentiation and distinction. There's also a signal from the LP marketplace. They're looking for certain type of opportunities with certain managers. And then also every emerging manager, we all are looking for what's the edge that we are bringing to the table.
Yeah, it's a great answer. The good old cliche value add in VC.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a funny one, if I can just touch on that briefly, because
Sure.
there are a lot of memes and jokes around VCs, saying, what can I do for you? So how can I help? Or, what's my value add? Or, we are value added VCs and stuff. And yes, I think there's a certain amount of subjectivity around it. And there's a certain amount of like, hey, let me just throw this name or this word around a little bit. But I do think that, there are a few areas where, VCs, generally speaking, can definitely be specifically value added. The first one is just around the fundraising process. Our jobs are basically to understand the fundraising market on behalf of our startups. We're always looking for opportunities to invest. We're always looking for opportunities to help our companies make it to that next round, and really understand what downstream investors are interested in, which ones are interested in the areas that our portfolio company lives in. So we are, by definition and necessity, supposed to be experts in that, and we should be. If the founder knows more than us, somebody is not doing their job to some degree about, as it relates to fundraising. The other aspect is that depending on background, networks, and relationships, there are oftentimes like critical areas where investors can can facilitate the right introductions that a founder may not otherwise have access to, whether it's critical suppliers or speaking on behalf of them or guaranteeing things. I know of certain prominent investors during the COVID supply chain disruption who were able to secure wafer fab capacity on behalf of their startups ahead of Fortune 100 companies. And that's a highly specialized relationship where the investor is putting their relationship and reputation on the line on behalf of their portfolio company. And I think that is an extraordinarily unique form of value add. Yeah.
I have to say, I have heard you pitch your portfolio companies in private meetings, and I was thoroughly impressed. You sounded like a founder. It was crazy. Like it's a standard to live up to. So yeah, definitely kudos for like owning that, and yeah, really, really good job.
Oh, thanks for that feedback. Sometimes I feel like I dive a little bit too much into it, but it's just because I love it. Like I love the products that people are building, and sometimes I feel like I geek out a little bit too much on it, but I don't know.
Perfect segue. I want the definitive answer: software or hardware? Let's just put it.
Yes.
Put that one to bed.
Sure. Yeah. So we get that question a lot as it relates to, Union Labs, you guys are the IoT guys, and you just invest in, you're a hardware fund. And I'm like, no. Again, we go back to we're looking to solve really big and interesting problems. Also, I would say about less than 50%, less than 40% of our portfolio is actually, involves some form of hardware. So that's not necessarily the case. I would say that we are not afraid of investing in hardware if it makes business sense. we started August in 2012, 2013 timeframe. This was at the outset of all things IoT. Johnny Ive at Apple had firmly made his stamp on product design and beautiful hardware, beautiful things that you, Simon, and Sabrina help produce and bring to fruition in the marketplace. But it was
any
in some
naive
ways
founder, you said we're going to do that.
yes. I quickly realized, I would say in private, I was so angry at Apple for setting these totally unrealistic expectations on the behalf of consumers, because this was just an impossible.
For every other consumer electronics startup that came after 2010.
After the CNC revolution, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes. Everybody wanted CNC everything. I was like, oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, after that experience, like there was a lot of making hardware for the sake of making hardware. And then I think there was a backlash against that whole phase. Like, everyone all of a sudden became super sophisticated and like, what's your gross margin on this? What's your BOM cost? And, we don't touch hardware at all. It's terrible. And I think the truth
You mean
is
they weren't asking for CAC and ROAS? Before this past days.
Yeah. I will say that, at the outset, these days we talk a lot about, hey, what's your ARR? What's your recurring revenue model? Blah, blah, blah. And that's just table stakes and like basic that everyone talks about. There were very few of those questions posed by investors to us when we were getting started, right? And so there are definitely swings and trends, and I think that was obviously not good. For the overall ecosystem, for nobody to be thinking about how are you going to make money in the long term and just focusing on beautiful design. But coming back around to your question, software versus hardware, we are very cognizant of the fact that, hardware development cycles are expensive and take a long time. That said, if you are thoughtful about what kind of hardware you are building and does it actually factor into the solution, and you are also creating some form of a moat, whether technical or physical or otherwise, yes, you should absolutely do that. There are certain businesses where, if you're just producing software, you have no protection. I think the whole craze around generative AI and all the startups around that is kind of a case in point. Like, there's almost no differentiation, or you could create some sort of interesting application, but you can get blown away, literally 7 days later by somebody who has either created something, the same thing, a better version, or, Microsoft and or Google has rolled out, the same generative AI across their entire suite of products, and then, destroys an entire category of startups. So I think, like software or hardware, no, you got to build what makes sense. You got to invest in what makes sense, given the landscape.
Brings us to the AI. Or were you going to add something else?
I was going to. No, I was going to perfect segue into the AI aspects. I was just going to make a comment around generative AI. Like, my thing on generative AI is that I'm not an expert, but I look at the near-term applications that I think are sustainable, and I think the impact on software development is going to be significant from the standpoint of, like, you can greatly increase the efficiency and productivity of a much larger swath of software engineers than you previously could in the past, and that is effectively going to reduce the cost of application development. How much, in what areas, I don't know. I'm not the expert on this, but you'd have to be blind to think that there's going to be no impact to that. And that, to me, actually pushes me further into the camp of, you have to find out what your differentiation is. And if you are thoughtful about the hardware that you are building, that could be a useful dimension to apply.
So, I love that perspective. Yeah.
You believe AI, and I think this is already happening, AI is certainly already accelerating product development in software.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts about product development for hardware?
So
for
I think,
Gen AI?
yeah. I mean, I can, opinion of one, some of the
Sure.
immediate
That's why we're
applications that
here.
I see are just,
Just the three of us.
software, software development of, for, say robotics as an example. I think that accelerating, the training of robots, or the setup and application of a robot in a specific context to do a
Yeah.
particular job of automation, like that
Yeah.
setup time and cost is typically what prevents or
Mhm.
makes uneconomical a lot of automation projects. So I
right.
can see generative AI, significantly reducing that cost and enabling a much wider range of robotics type applications. But stepping at a higher level, like I'm sure you guys have seen this, like you've seen software people attempt to do hardware. I could arguably put myself in that category with August. There are also hardware people who produce regrettably not awesome software in conjunction with whatever it is that they're making. I think Apple represents a pretty much a pinnacle of balance between those two things. The iPhone really took off, and iPod, etc., took off just because the software experience was, so tightly integrated with the hardware that even though Sony and anybody else could achieve the same kind of physical quality, they could not deliver the right end user experience because their software just wasn't strong enough. I think that part of that is cultural. But I think there's an opportunity for hardware companies to significantly step up their capability on the software side by intelligently leveraging what generative AI brings to the table for their software teams. If they're thoughtful about it, they could significantly increase productivity or quality or what have you. It's hard to go against culture, so I wouldn't bet heavily on it, but I would say that they have an opportunity to improve the overall experience. It's up to them whether they want to take it.
Yeah, I like it. Essentially, you're saying that developing software within hardware teams or software for hardware will be sped up and made easier. And in addition to that, I think we've had some conversations around reinforcement learning and modern AI models applied to robotics, especially, and how, robotics, the biggest hurdle typically is the front load, the NRE, right? Getting them up to speed and working in a consistent environment, not to mention an environment that's changing. So certainly I also agree that AI is going to facilitate speeding up of those types of products or startups.
There's a lot to go for it.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
In the AI realm, which areas we'll just ask the generic VC question, which ones have been exciting to you so far? And what are areas that you think that are not quite ready yet, given the applications that you've seen?
Maybe I'll give some examples. Like, I think I was going to ask something similar, but more specifically, like Gen AI. Do we think Gen AI for mechanical design, electrical design, or collaboration on hardware development is going to actually be accelerated by, and this is a question to all of us, not specifically
I have
prompted to
strong
Chris,
thoughts
but
on this one.
by
but
current models, which are mostly language based, right? So Sabrina, do you want to go first on that?
Or Chris?
Or you said specific.
I have strong thoughts. I think from the electrical design standpoint, I think it's a lot more parameterized of a problem in terms of like generative design. Whereas with mechanical design and product design in general, there's just a lot more things that you would need to input into your model to have it trained appropriately. And in order to get that swath of data, all of that data is super disjoint, even within inside of a single organization. Like if you ask any specific team within a large company, how did the last product go? Like tell us, like summarize all the learnings and input that into this model and figure out like why this wall thickness was this. And it's too much information. And in order to actually consolidate that into a way that can train a model to actually generate different products based off of certain criteria, I think we're super far away from that just based off of the organizational structure of the data today. In terms of electrical engineering PCB design, that seems a little bit at least more parameterized, but I still appreciate that there's still a lot of nuance there. And yeah, those are my hot takes. I'm interested to hear what you guys think of that.
No, I mean, I think that's that definitely makes sense, and I think Sabrina, you highlight, the interesting frontier or boundary for a lot of generative AI. It's so impressive on carefully selected examples. Write me an email, or build me an application, or solve XYZ problem. You can probably find mechanical design questions that have been answered well by a large language model, to the point where people are like, wow, right? But to actually put it into production in any useful capacity, the devil is always in the details. What's the corpus of data that it was trained on? How good and high quality it was, and what are the actual boundaries for the population of examples or questions that it's going to get asked. My thinking is that at least for software engineering, because there's so much code that's basically out there, easy to execute, easy to obtain, and things like that, that's definitely far and away an area where you can have test frameworks and test cases rapidly written as frameworks, and that's an enormous and an incredible accelerant on the software engineering side. It feels like electrical engineering, electrical design. Again, I'm just a physicist who dabbles around, so I don't really know this area. I would agree with you. It seems a little more parameterized, and you'd have more opportunity. I did see a company whose name escapes me that is focused on circuit and PCB design. Again, there are other flavors like high-speed circuit design, et cetera, that probably not going to do very well in, but for low-end IoT-ish type hardware and things like that, very simple circuits, yeah, that could be a no-brainer, and that's a lot of grunt work that a lot of companies have to grind out. But I think at the super high level, I like LLMs as a really fascinating user interface. I mean, just being able to, I think Google released a paper and videos. I think it was based on their Palm network. I'm blanking on the name. It was in like December or November of last year, right around when ChatGPT was released. They also showed off an LLM interface into their robots. So you could say, hey, I'm feeling thirsty, right? And the robot is on wheels. It's a universal arm that's rolling around the kitchen and office area at Google. And the robot's like, okay, he said he's thirsty. I know that there's Coke in the kitchen. I'm going to walk over there or roll over there, identify what's a drink, pick it up, bring it over. And then the guy deliberately spills it, and the robot looks at it, and the guy says, oh, can you help clean this up? And the robot again goes back to the kitchen and says, oh, here's a sponge, I'm going to pick that up. And they're showing all the quote unquote steps and thinking it is, but it's just a very natural language interface to it, and it properly broke down the question or command into parsable problems, which I thought was really, really cool.
I think the quintessential software, when I was learning how to code way back in the day, they would say, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, as the example of why coding was hard, because you have so many steps you have to think of. And now with large language models, it does it automatically. So like we're at the stage where that's just a given. You can do that, which is in itself insane. I think we all appreciate that.
Yeah, you said it in a handful of words what I was taking minutes to say. Thank you.
No.
Cheers.
Woo.
To sometimes being less efficient. Okay. Brings me to my next topic, which is, first of all, Chris, thank you for having and still being such a great mentor, advisor, and peer to us and the emerging deep tech community in general. And on that note, being a somewhat newcomer to VC compared to you, no offense, of course, but I've heard that deep tech community is more supportive and collaborative versus maybe, let's just say, the evil empire of generalist VCs. Do you think that's just because it's a newer space? Do you think it's something more nuanced? Is it, maybe I'm being too specific, is it a general statement that could be made about all emerging managers? You went through Coolwater before us, emerging manager program. Would love to hear your perspectives on this topic.
My thoughts are that it's new and it's difficult for all of us, and there's so many intricacies as we are trying to even find the boundaries of the definition of what is deep tech, and what are we investing in, and what is ultimately going to enable some of these companies to pay out within the venture timescale. All of these questions are not solved. I think in some other categories of investment within venture, there are much clearer paths that are readily defined. And then it becomes around optimizing and being super efficient, which sometimes requires sharper elbows. But in this space right now, there's a lot of frontier, and there's a lot of space, and there's a lot of path finding that's going on. And there's opportunity for us to try and work together to try and answer some of these questions and figure it out. I'll give you another example. One of our advisors and mentors is Brian Jacobs, who was one of the founding partners for Emergence Capital. And they created this category of investing, like, oh, let's invest in cloud or software as a service, right? Why should you have, a CRM system in-house running on your Oracle database? What if you could operate it on the internet? And, this company is called Salesforce, right? So we're going to invest in this out of our first fund. And no one knows what the term SaaS is, and never been heard of before. They were actually part of a cohort of several other funds and managers who were all getting their funds going at around the same time as well. And they all collaborated to talk about, like, how do you set up your firm? How are you doing deals? How are you thinking around compensation? How are you building the models and convincing your LPs or, other interested parties that these companies, your portfolio is ultimately going to scale and exit. All of these really, seemingly basic questions that today would be well answered. But back then, when they were first getting started, they weren't. And they were non-competitive at the time. And so they did regularly get together, have dinners and things like that, and swap stories and stuff. So I think it's just a feature, rather, of us investing in what we're choosing to invest in, this deep tech sector, at the very earliest stages in this current economic environment. So I think that tends to lend itself well to a decent amount of collaboration. Now, when our funds and assets under management are in the tens of billions, and we're talking about our all the wonderful exits that we've had, there's going to be a lot more people, because they're going to see, Simon and Sabrina and Chris, they were all right. We should jump into this category. It might be a different environment, but for now, like when we're still building, I think there's definitely a desire to collaborate and make this sector and this opportunity that we have really succeed and take off.
Very good answer. I appreciate it. On that note, we are collaborating on a SF Tech Week event next week, which
Yes.
I'll drop in the comments. Deep Tech, hopefully the Deep Tech mixer for many years to come. That's pretty exciting. So thank you for your team's support on that. Very, very excited. We've got, I think, over 150 people have applied already. And Sabrina and Bogdan and I have the lovely task of going through them all, given our limited capacity. But that'll be a fun thing for Monday afternoon. Maybe we'll start a Monday afternoon beers with list screening or something.
Starting the week off
Okay.
right, for sure.
Okay. I think we're pretty much wrapped up, and it's been really, really great hearing from all your experience and perspectives on these topics. Really awesome. We've talked so many times. We talk, I think, almost every week, but still, every time I talk to you, there's like a wealth of information. So it's really cool. Sabrina, you can do the honors of asking our final question. Tradition question.
So Chris, who has been your biggest supporter in your professional career and why?
Yeah, that's a pretty straightforward answer for me. That would have to be my wife, Joanna,
Nice.
because this is an unusual job that we're all engaged in. Being an investor, being a VC, launching your own fund on your own, and it's a job that does not sleep sometimes, and the demands are not just on me. There are certain obligations that end up getting placed upon my family implicitly, and I am incredibly grateful for her support in this particular endeavor, because without it, I think it would be a lot of trouble. So to Joanna, I'm very grateful to your support.
We're all grateful
cheers
to
to
Joanna,
Joanna.
And their spouses, but
Yeah.
Joanna
And all of
especially.
our
Thank you, Chris.
spouses, certainly.
Actually,
That's my favorite answer so far.
Yeah, on that note, Sabrina and I recently, for the first time, brought up in an LP call that we were very appreciative to our spouses for supporting us on this career, which is very akin to a founder. I'm sure you would draw analogies too, Chris. But
Yes.
Actually, do you think? Maybe this is too controversial of a question for this podcast, but what is more difficult on you and the spouse? Do you think founder or emerging VC, like Fund One, maybe even before you've raised your fund VC?
There's generic answer. There are challenges to both, but I think in this particular situation, we have a young family with young kids, and if I had chosen the founder route, I would have been probably on the road a lot more, like at a factory or something like that, and that's that. Yeah, I think she would have been more unhappy in that situation.
Travel.
Whereas right now, all she does is she sees me on my phone and she lectures me and is very unhappy with I'm on my phone when I should be paying attention to the rest of the family. So she has a more direct connection to dealing with that kind of bad behavior on my part.
Hardware founder is tough with all the travel. I mean, even hardware, not engineer, non-founder. Yeah, it's tough, but certainly, I do agree that there's there's still travel, but a little bit less as a VC.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of after hours stuff, though. A lot of after hours events and networking and stuff, which is tough.
Which is very demanding. It's weird, No. Seriously, I do have to go to this cocktail. Yes, it is cocktails, and yes, it's a dinner. But no, this is really for work. I'm meeting an LP here.
We'll make a series of memes about this. Actually, I think it's deserving.
Seriously, I've had that same conversation with my husband. It's like, no, this is really. I have to go to this extravagant cocktail hour and wear like nice clothes. Like, what?
the nature of the industry.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty much coming up on time. Chris,
Yeah,
again,
well,
it's been awesome.
One more time, cheers to all of our spouses and those who
Yeah.
supported us along the way.
Yes.
Thank you guys
Yeah.
for sure.
Cheers to all the supporters and family.
Thank you
and
all.
spouses.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And thank you to Simon and Sabrina for hosting. Cheers.
Of course.
Of course.
And I want to give a shout out and thank you to all the founders that work with us, because I think it's a two-way street, right? It's not just emerging VCs supporting founders. I think a lot of founders support us. So thank you to all our founders. Really great to be building those early, but hopefully very long-standing relationships. And that is it. Thank you. This has been Beers with VCs episode 3 with Chris Kim from Union Labs. And we will see you next month, last Friday of every month. Cheers. Over and out.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.